Imagine a product that cannot be seen, touched, or smelled. It takes up no space in a warehouse, and it cannot be stolen in the usual sense of the word. And yet, governments sell it for tens of billions of dollars, and corporations wage wars over it to the death. This product is the radio frequency spectrum, the most expensive invisible thing in the world. To understand the scale of the phenomenon, let us start with the basics. The radio frequency spectrum is the range of electromagnetic waves that are used to transmit information, from AM radio, which our grandmothers and grandfathers listened to 5G networks, thanks to which we watch videos in the metro. All of this works on different frequencies of this spectrum. The problem is that the spectrum is limited, physically. This is not software that can be copied an infinite number of times. It is a resource similar to land. It has a finite amount, and two people cannot use the same frequency in the same place at the same time without creating interference with each other. For a long time, this resource was simply given away. Governments distributed frequencies among the military, broadcasters, and emergency services. But in the 1990s, everything changed. Mobile communications began explosive growth, and suddenly it turned out that the air around us was worth a fortune. The first frequency auctions began in the United States in 1994. Before that, the Federal Communications Commission simply issued licenses on a first-come, first-served basis, or held contests where the criteria were very vague. The result? Companies received licenses almost for free and then resold them for millions of dollars. The government realized that it was missing out on colossal money, and it came up with a brilliant scheme, the auction. Not a simple auction where the winner is the one who offers more money, but a complex game with rules developed by Nobel Prize winners in economics. These auctions became so complex that companies began hiring game theorists and mathematicians to develop bidding strategies. Imagine this. In one room sit representatives of telecommunications giants, each with a team of analysts, and they conduct a multi-day battle for an invisible resource. Why is this so complicated? Because frequencies have different value. Low frequencies pass through walls and spread over long distances, ideal for covering rural areas. High frequencies transmit more data, but over short distances, excellent for cities. Plus, there's a geographic factor. Frequencies in New York are more expensive than in Wyoming. Telecommunications companies do not just buy frequencies, they fight wars over them. And these wars unfold on several fronts at the same time. The first front is the auctions themselves. Here, companies play psychological games with each other. One classic tactic is signaling bids. Suppose Company A wants to obtain a license in California, and Company B wants one in Texas. Company A may place an aggressive bid on the Texas license not because it needs it, but to signal to Company B, stay out of California, or I will make your purchase in Texas very expensive. In the United States, there was a case where companies used the last 3 digits of their bids as a code for coordination. For example, a bid of $15,378,000 could mean, I want license number 378, do not interfere. When regulators noticed this, the rules had to be urgently changed. The second front is lobbying. Companies spend millions to persuade governments to release new frequencies or change the rules for their use. Real dramas unfold here. For example, the military may occupy a valuable frequency band that is ideal for 5G. Telecom companies lobby for the transfer of these frequencies. The military resists, citing national security. Politicians find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. The third front is legal battles. Companies challenge auction results, auction rules, and the actions of competitors. Some cases drag on for years and cost tens of millions of dollars in legal fees alone. Now, about a legendary event that went down in history as one of the craziest auctions of all time. The German 3G license auction of the year 2000. Context matters. The late 1990s were the peak of the dot-com bubble. Internet companies were valued at billions, even though they generated no profits. Investors were throwing money at any project with the prefix E or .com. Mobile internet seemed like the next El Dorado. Everyone believed that whoever obtained 3G licenses would become the king of the digital economy. The German government realized it was sitting on a gold mine. They designed auction rules intended to maximize revenue, and they did it brilliantly, or cynically, depending on the point of view. The auction began in July of the year 2000. 7 companies participated, including giants such as Deutsche, Telecom, Vodafone, and Mannesmann. At stake were 12 licenses. The auction format was ascending, meaning prices could only go up. And, most importantly, the auction continued until exactly as many participants remained as there were licenses. What did this mean in practice? That someone was guaranteed to end up with nothing. This created incredible tension. Companies had already invested millions in preparation for 3G, hired thousands of specialists, and promised shareholders mountains of gold. To drop out now meant admitting total failure. The bidding went on day after day, week after week. Prices rose to astronomical levels. Company representatives lived in hotels in Bonn, spending sleepless nights analyzing competitors' strategies. It was like a poker game for billions of dollars, only stretched out over a month and a half. At some point, one of the companies, Debitel, gave up. It simply could not continue raising bids. It dropped out. But the auction continued, because now there were 6 companies for 12 licenses, and the rules required an exact match. A few days later, another company gave up. Finally, on August 18th of the year 2000, after 173 bidding rounds, the auction ended. 6 companies received 2 licenses each. The total amount? $50.8 billion. That was more than the annual budget of some countries. The German government celebrated. Other countries watched with envy and began planning their own auctions. The United Kingdom held an auction and received £34 billion. Italy, 10 billion euros. It was a gold rush, except they were not selling land but air. But then, the inevitable happens. The dot-com bubble bursts. Literally 1 month after the German auction, markets begin to fall. By the year 2002, it became clear companies had overpaid, catastrophically overpaid. The problem was not only inflated prices. 3G technology turned out to be insufficiently mature. Its deployment was delayed. The first 3G phones were expensive and buggy, and most importantly, consumers were in no hurry to pay for mobile internet the amounts that operators had counted on. Companies that bought the licenses found themselves under monstrous debt burdens. British Telecom, which paid billions at the British auction, was forced to sell assets to service its debts. Some operators were balancing on the edge of bankruptcy. Telecom stocks collapsed. The story of the 3G auctions became a subject of study in business schools as an example of how euphoria and fear of missing out can lead to irrational decisions. It was a classic case of the winner S-curse, when the winner of an auction pays more than the acquired asset is actually worth. But the story did not end there. It evolved. Each new generation of mobile communications brought a new wave of struggle for spectrum. 4G required even more frequencies. By that time, governments had become more cunning. They began setting reserve prices to avoid dumping, but also to avoid repeating the madness of the year 2000. Coverage obligations appeared. You could no longer simply buy a license and sit on it. You had to build a network. With the arrival of 5G, the game became even more complex. 5G requires wide frequency bands across different ranges. Low frequencies for coverage, mid frequencies for balance, high frequencies, millimeter waves, for ultra-fast data transmission in cities. This means that companies need to buy spectrum in several ranges simultaneously, which makes bidding strategy incredibly complex. Add geopolitics to this. The United States and China are competing for leadership in 5G. Spectrum becomes a matter of national security. New players appear, for example, Elon Musk with Starlink, which wants to use satellites and also needs frequencies. Today's spectrum wars go far beyond simple auctions. Take the conflict between mobile operators and airlines in the United States in the year 2022. Operators bought licenses in the C-band range for $81 billion, the most expensive auction in United States history, but these frequencies are located close to those used by aviation equipment. Airlines sounded the alarm. Interference with altimeters that measure altitude during landing was possible. Panic began. Operators had already paid tens of billions, built equipment, and were being asked to delay the launch. Months of negotiations, threats of flight cancellations, intervention by the White House. In the end, a compromise was found, but everyone's nerves were frayed. Or look at the situation with China. Huawei became a global leader in the production of telecom equipment largely because China early on allocated large volumes of spectrum for 5G and created favorable conditions for network deployment. This gave Chinese companies a head start, which caused panic in the West and led to sanctions against Huawei. The wars over spectrum will not end. On the contrary, they will only intensify. 6G is already on the horizon, and it will require even more frequencies. New applications are emerging. Autonomous vehicles, the Internet of Things, virtual reality. Everyone needs spectrum. But here a problem arises. The good frequencies are already occupied. Low frequencies are distributed among broadcasters, the military, and satellite communications. Where can spectrum for new technologies be obtained? One option is to take frequencies away from those who use them inefficiently. For example, television broadcasting occupies huge portions of spectrum, even though most people watch TV via cable or the internet. There are discussions about freeing up these frequencies and giving them to mobile communications, but TV broadcasters resist fiercely to the bitter end. Another option is dynamic spectrum allocation. Instead of permanently assigning frequencies to someone, to use smart systems that determine in real time who needs spectrum at a given moment and allocate it accordingly. The technology exists, but implementation is slow due to regulatory and political obstacles. The third path is space. Satellite constellations like Starlink promise internet from space, but they also need frequencies, and they conflict with terrestrial networks. Elon Musk and telecom operators are already exchanging barbs on Twitter and in courtrooms. The radio frequency spectrum is an astonishing phenomenon of the modern economy, a resource that cannot be seen, created by nature itself, but given value by humanity. We have turned the empty space around us into one of the most expensive commodities in the world. Over the past 30 years, governments have earned hundreds of billions of dollars selling air. Companies have gone bankrupt and grown rich trying to control this resource. There have been moments of madness, like the German auction of the year 2000, and moments of sober calculation. But the most striking thing is that most people do not even think about it. We take out our phones, check Instagram, call friends, and have no idea what battles were won and lost, so that these invisible waves could deliver our messages. Spectrum is a limited resource, like oil or gold. But unlike them, no new deposit can be discovered. This is all there is. And as long as our civilization depends on wireless communication, and with each year we depend on it more and more, the battles for spectrum will continue. The next round is already beginning. The most expensive invisible thing in the world continues to rise in value.